Once the United States has fully started preparing for war, we are ready to send troops over. Now, we had a great Navy, remember the Great White Fleet and the modern Navy, um, championed by Alfred Thayer Mahan, but we had a fairly small army. So now we have the American Expeditionary Force. Here is sort of an example, a typical example of an American soldier who would have gone over to Europe. And the leader of the American Expeditionary Force is John J. Pershing. Already had a military career, had fought in the Spanish-American War, and he's really known kind of for his stubbornness. When the American troops get over to France, both the British and the French troops demanded that the American forces be integrated, that the armies sort of cooperate and have joint efforts. But Pershing insisted that the AEF, or the American Expeditionary Force, would operate independently, that it would be only under his command, and that he wouldn't have to sort of cooperate with others. However, there ultimately were some American divisions that fought under British leadership, and Pershing did allow a few all-black units to be integrated with the French army, because the French army also had a few black units as well. Now, these soldiers who are going over, they get the nickname doughboys, and that term goes back to about the Civil War, when soldiers would cook fried dough around a campfire at night. But for some reason, this became the nickname for the soldiers that went over for America in 1917. Now, many of these soldiers were drafted in 1917. A few of them got over to France in 1917. But for the most part, American soldiers did not arrive in Europe until early 1918. Now, when Germany sent the Zimmermann Note, it seems pretty crazy. Why would Germany want to bring America into this war? Well, with stalemate, no one seemed to be the clear winner as of 1917. With stalemate, everything seemed just kind of back and forth and back and forth. Germany was hoping that by sort of dragging America into the war effort, as America prepared for war, they would have less time to support the British. And in that intervening time, that's when Germany planned on defeating the British and the French. However, the Americans were faster at mobilizing than the Germans anticipated and made it over to France much faster than they expected. There are a few major battles that the Americans are involved in. The first is the Battle of Chateau Thierry, and this is important because the Allied forces are trying to prevent the Germans from reaching Paris along the Marne River. And this is in many ways sort of a repeat of the first major battle of the war, the Battle of the Marne, in September of 1914. One part of this battle is known as the Battle of Belleau Wood. And here we see the United States Marines are incredibly active, and they are fierce, fierce fighters. And the Germans call them devil dogs or hellhounds because they were quite surprised at how fierce these American Marines were. And devil dogs is still a nickname that the Marine Corps often goes by. So here we see that these fresh soldiers are helping to reinvigorate the Allies. But one problem is the Americans are completely unexperienced in combat. So many of our casualties are the result of that inexperience. Possibly the most famous American soldier in the First World War is Alvin York. And this is your bonus movie for this unit. Alvin York initially was a conscientious objector. He did not want to serve. Ultimately, he decides he will serve, and he becomes incredibly successful and becomes a bit of a hero. And he fights at the Battle of Meuse-Argonne, and this is the biggest engagement by the United States, or the American Expeditionary Force. You can see those two big green blobs on the map. The one on the left is Belleau Wood. along the top of the Marne River. And then over to the left, you can see the Argonne Forest. And this is near Verdun, which those of you who were in sophomore history at Oaks will remember is the longest battle of the First World War. So we really see with that stalemate, these battles aren't moving location at all. The Battle of Meuse-Argonne begins in late summer, early fall of 1918, and there are a huge number of forces that are there. This is the biggest battle for the Americans. And the Germans, while on the home front they were exhausted and everyone was running out of supplies, the Germans were still willing to be fierce fighters. And here is an old church, these ruins, that the Germans used as a lookout tower. And I just think it's a really cool picture. Now, the Americans lose 26,000 soldiers and 95,000 are wounded. So huge losses. But again, this goes back to the Americans' inexperience. This battle is going on, it's back and forth, we still have that stalemate, when all of a sudden, on November 11th, armistice is declared. And so remember that this whole thing of stalemate, there was going to be no clear winner in this war. But when the German Kaiser abdicates, then the German military decides to surrender, essentially, to give up. So Armistice Day is the day when fighting ends, and it's the reason we celebrate Veterans Day on November 11th. So now that the war is over, everything is great, everything is fine, except for the Spanish flu. Now, this flu virus started showing up in 1917, and it was happening all across Europe. But the reason it's called the Spanish flu is because Spain was not involved in the war. Spanish papers were not restricted or censored for the war effort. So the first reports of this flu virus are in Spain, but that's the only reason it's called the Spanish flu. It affected millions across the entire globe. And so there were many soldiers who got it, but even once the war is over, there are many veterans who get it. And the thing about this flu virus is it tended to attack people who were in their teens and 20s and 30s who were relatively healthy. Normally when we have flu outbreaks today, people are very concerned about the very young and the very old. So this flu virus was taking people who seemed to be healthy. And I love this image. Don't do these things. Don't kiss your sweetheart while Spanish flu or pneumonia plague is on. You might kill her or him by passing a deadly germ. Do these things. Spanish flu is staging a comeback. And so people were very afraid about this. They didn't know exactly what to do. But ultimately, 50 million people around the entire globe are killed by this flu. And part of what I think is so horrendous is you would get sick and you'd be in bed and you'd feel awful and you'd have aches and cold sweats and stuff like that. And then you'd start to feel better. You'd start to feel like you were getting well again. And then after a day or two of feeling well, you'd get really sick all of a sudden, and then you'd die. So psychologically, this was devastating. And this is going to lead to what we call the lost generation, which we'll talk about in the next unit. Before the war even ended, President Wilson made a speech to Congress, and it's known as the 14-point speech. And in this, he gives 14 ideas for how to restore and maintain world peace. And the problem is, we've just been at war with the entire globe for 4 years. How are we going to create peace out of all of this? And this cartoon is kind of mocking him. Can he produce any harmony between all these different parties? Now, the 14 points, we have open diplomacy. If we look back at what caused this war, the secret alliances. So don't have secret alliances. Number 2, freedom of the seas. This goes to unrestricted submarine warfare. All of these different issues, reduction of armaments, don't have a huge army, you'll be tempted to use it. All of these points are targeting issues that caused the war or problems caused by the war. So, for instance, recognizing the Balkan boundaries. That's one of the causes of this war, all of those ethnic groups. We have limitations on Turkey. Now it is no longer the Ottoman Empire. It has become the modern country of Turkey. Number 14, though, is the most important: creation of an association of nations, and this is known as the League of Nations. President Wilson suggested an organization in which all members would take an oath, a mutual oath of security. And if one member of this oath is attacked, all members would go to its aid. And many people saw this as doomed to fail, including most of the United States. Congress was not interested in ratifying this treaty, if you will, or becoming part of this organization. They saw it as doomed to fail. So President Wilson goes on a speaking tour around the United States trying to convince the American public, who would hopefully then contact their representatives in Washington, D.C. He is so intent on seeing this League of Nations happen and having America be a part of it that he ultimately becomes very sick. He just is drained, his health declines, he even has a stroke. Ultimately, the United States does not join the League of Nations because it knows it is doomed to fail. And some people might say that because America did not join, this is what ultimately would make the League of Nations a failure. Whether that's the case or not, it is ultimately going to lead to the Second World War.